Okay, I'm going to start recording. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We are here to just kind of talk about how our food choices affect the climate and affect our greater communities, and how we can really make a difference by supporting local farms and organic farms. And we're going to talk to two really amazing farmers today, farmers and among many other wonderful things. But I'm really excited to introduce Aslynn from Rodale Institute, and Tomia, who owns Wildflower Farm and is a board member at NOFA and Phobos, and among many other things. So to start, Aslynn has worked with Earth in various capacities since 2016. She's particularly interested in vegetable crops and edible landscaping, continuing to study holistic health modalities independently and with the guidance of Kula Kamala Ashram in Reading, Pennsylvania. Currently, Aslynn is the farm manager of the St. Luke's Organic Farm in Easton, Pennsylvania, where they provide produce directly to the St. Luke's University Health Network. Off the farm, Aslynn enjoys traveling, being outdoors, and seeing live music. And Tomia is, like I said, the owner of Wildflower Farm, as well as Dance for Life and Gardening for Life. And life stands for love, inspiration, faith, and empowerment. Tomia is also the Princeton Public Schools Food Systems Literacy Pilot Program, implementing that right now. And Tomia is an educator of 19 years, a farmer, master gardener, specializing in edible gardens. She has been an edible gardens consultant for 15 years, been in the dance ministry for 14 years. She's a board member at the Friends of Hopewell Valley Open Space, a board member of at NOFA, New Jersey, founder of the Healing Waters Farming Project, a member of governance for the Ujamaa Cooperative Farming Alliance, where she's also a lead for the Value Added Working Group and a member seed grower. She partners with local organizations and schools and is a featured farmer mentor within youth and young adult programs such as the Outdoor Equity Alliance and the Princeton University Seed Farm. Tomia dedicates herself to imparting healthy habits and positive body image to both her dance and gardening students, and closing food security gaps through education. When she's not in her family garden or out caring for animals, dancing, or teaching, Tomia enjoys cooking, canning, horseback riding, sports, spending time with her family, and of course, a very good book. Don't we all? Wonderful. So I was hoping that we could all just kind of, thank you for those who shared in the chat already about, what you're into. Eating food is something that we all do, hopefully multiple times a day. So there's a lot of room for, making different choices and understanding what those choices can do, and like the ripple effect that they can have. So yeah, I'd love to pass it over to Aslynn and Tomia if you both want to kind of chime in with some thoughts of how we can affect the climate with our food choices.
Well, I'm happy to go first. I think for me, a huge part of affecting the climate with our food choices is about biodiversity. It's about preserving culturally significant seed and food. It's obviously about buying local, eating seasonally. Those are things that, many of us who are on the call probably are already aware of. But the culturally significant seed and food, I think, is a conversation that is a growing conversation. It's a very needed conversation, and it directly ties with biodiversity and the climate change scenario that we're all now facing and trying to deal with. I think that there is absolute direct correlation with that. There's a correlation between culturally significant food and seed and the health of our communities. both individually and as a whole. I think all of those things are most definitely intertwined. So I think that was a part of a large part of it is a large part of the conversation and education for me.
Yeah, and I would add too that, you know, we're all faced right now with the effects of climate change, and because most of our food has switched to being sourced from the grocery store, you know, we've lost about 94% of all of our crop diversity in the last century. And so just kind of going off of what you're sharing, Tomia, you know, we looking back and trying to value homesteading, gardening, finding our niche in whatever way that is. Maybe it's you know, our favorite variety of corn, or our like herbal medicines that we like, you know, finding our niche and kind of communing with that and understanding what it's doing to the land, how it's resilient to the land, and how it's you know, helping us learn more about our food and about how it's interacting with these, you know, impending change, you know, these severe changes we're all faced with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
That's a great point. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I would also, I guess from my perspective too, like, because most of our food is sourced from the grocery stores now, you know, really understanding what the differences are between conventional produce and organic produce. You know, we when we go into the grocery store, we're seeing all sorts of labels now. You know, conventional produce, you know, what does that mean? That's food that's grown with chemical intervention. All of those inputs that are helping with soil fertility, pest management, disease, those inputs are all created from all sorts of chemicals. And the FDA does say that those chemicals are endocrine disruptors, and they do contribute to neurocognitive disorders, which could be like dementia and things like that. And so like that's what we know conventional farming is. We know that it pollutes the water, it pollutes the air, and those chemical interventions are residual on the food that we're purchasing. And so, you know, because we're doing these things, we also have higher yields, and we have really, you know, pretty produce. You know, there's no blemishes on it, and we're getting lots of it. And then when we look to organic produce, you know, we know that we're having this smaller carbon footprint, which means like we're not emitting as many greenhouse gases as conventional farming. And we're conserving and building the soil. And we know that we're doing that because we're using all inputs from organically derived or naturally derived sources. So rather than chemical fertilizer, maybe we're using like fish emulsion. And this is just to say that there's less pollutants too. This doesn't mean that we're, you know, solving all of the world's problems with organic agriculture. We're just polluting less. And so there's like 4 major labels that you can see around organic farming or organic foods. USDA certified organic, organically organic without the USDA label, and then specific ingredients are organic, and then just naturally derived. And so it's important to know what all of these different options are as a consumer and make choices from there if you're shopping in the grocery store. So I feel like I covered a lot, and I don't want to take up too much time. So if anyone, Tomia, if you have anything to add to that, I'd love to hear from you or anyone else.
Well, I know when it comes to being in the grocery store and you hear more and more people talk about organic versus conventional and what does that really mean? One of the conversations that I have a lot with people circulates around, does the organic label mean anything anymore? Right? And one thing that I love about NOFA is NOFA has been critical in getting this law just passed with the new Organic Advisory Board for the state of New Jersey. And I think that kind of thing is going to be essential for closing loopholes for big ag. The challenge is always, you come up with organic and then the real organic, and then you've got sustainable and you've got regenerative and you've got all of these different sort of boxes that we have, and it can be very confusing and in some ways discouraging for the layperson who doesn't get all of what that means. They just want to have a healthy, they want to buy a healthy banana or a healthy apple. They don't want to try to figure out what all these boxes mean, and they don't know who to trust. And so one of the things I love is that with this new Organic Advisory Board is that we are working to close the loopholes to prevent a watering down of what organic actually means, right? So that people can really trust the organic label to actually be what they think it is. So for example, with us, we do true free range with our birds. So for example, if you have someone who's saying free range eggs, and many people don't know that could be a 1,000,000 bird house with a patio with a door on the side. And so that keeps people from being able to trust what free range is. So I challenge people to not only, take a little more time at the grocery store, but also going to the local farmers and actually see how these animals are being raised and see how your food is being produced, so that you are actually in a position to trust what it is you're purchasing and what you're consuming and feeding your family. I think that's super, super important.
Yeah, I think when you take a step back and you come away from all the varieties of labels that you can see in the grocery store, and you go to the farmer's market, right off the bat, you already know that it's very likely that your carbon footprint has already been reduced, because that term local is now so much smaller. That radius is so much smaller by going to the farmer's market and then actually having a conversation about, what makes you organic, what makes you not organic, with the people that are actually growing it. And you'll really, you'll probably learn something. You'll probably come up with more questions, and maybe you'll find, like, as a consumer, you don't need to have the USDA label, but you just need to have the conversation to know what is on the food that you're eating or what goes into the food that you're consuming. Maybe you value, animal rights or animal welfare more than the fact that they're eating conventional grain, and that's okay, and that's like your choice as a consumer. But taking it back from the grocery store, going to the farmer's market is like a huge step.
Yeah. It's certainly a step closer to knowing and being connected to your food source. And knowing someone you trust is producing that food that you're putting on the table for your family is, you just can't compare it to buying at the grocery store, whether you're buying conventional produce or not. There's something about knowing exactly how it's being handled and who's growing it and what the process is. So I think that once people come out and they know what that process is, it really changes the dynamic of how you see your food. It just really does. And of course, I teach people how to feed themselves. So I always encourage everyone to have a garden of your own, even if it's a salad on a windowsill. I think that's super connected and super important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're growing in your backyard, your circle, your radius is hyper local.
Talk about local, yeah.
Yeah.
And I certainly would love to hear what people, people who came in, what they're engaged in, what they're interested in, having a conversation about, if there are specific questions that they have that they would like to engage in. That'd be awesome.
You think there's an assumption farmers at farmers markets are organic? How accurate is that assumption? If not very, how could organic at farmers markets be encouraged? Thanks,
I
Matt.
love this question. I think that it's kind of surprising. I mean, as someone who's an organic farmer, I think it's surprising when I go to produce stands or farmers markets. I'd say a majority of the produce is not organic. It could even be shipped in from different places, especially if it's citrus or banana. If it isn't seasonally appropriate, it's been shipped in and it's likely conventional. So like, not to go back to the whole grocery store thing, but the label is the thing that tells you in the grocery store. And when you come into a space like a farmer's market, that's where you just need to ask the farmer, and just find your guy, find the person that is growing organic, and they may or may not have the label, but that's up to you. I mean, personally, I trust the label because I go through the USDA, like I go through the audit to have that label, but that's not to say that everyone is doing exactly what they're supposed to in the end anyway. I mean, I like the rules, and I I like to follow, what is organic, because I want my food to be organic, but I could see how that could be a little blurry.
Yeah, I think the key question, I do think that I don't think there's an assumption at farmers markets that they're organic. I think the assumption is that it's fresher than what's at the grocery store. And that is not always true. If it's a local farm, then yes, chances are it's fresher than the average thing you're getting at your local grocery store if the local grocery store is not buying local, right? So in that sense, whether it's conventional or not, you're reducing your carbon footprint, and you're probably getting fresher vegetables than something that's been picked early and shipped in on a truck, right? Tomatoes, for example. If it's been shipped in from across the country or from another country, then chances are it was picked too soon and it ripened on the truck, and it probably is not as nutrient dense and probably doesn't taste as good, frankly, as something that was picked ripe off the vine and is in your local farmer's market, conventional or organic. What I will also say is that this is where meeting the farmer is important. And sometimes the person who's at the farmer's market is not necessarily the farmer. Ideally, it's someone who knows the product, who can answer your questions. Is it possible to get someone who cannot do that? It's possible, but quite often, if it's a local farm, the person who's heading that market for that farm is usually quite knowledgeable. And the simple question that you want to ask is, do you grow conventionally or do you grow organically? Because they don't have to be certified to be able to say it's organically grown, right? They're not putting a label on that product that the USDA is going to challenge. If you just ask the question, do you grow conventionally or do you grow organically? They can answer that question. And truthfully, even if the person who's behind the produce at the farmer's market is not super knowledgeable, they will be able to answer that question 9 times out of 10. And that is really, is it the whole picture? No. Will it give you a real idea about where on the spectrum they are in terms of conventional and organic? Yes. If they say something like, we grow sustainably, or we are a regenerative farm, that also gives you where on the scale on this spectrum they might be. So that's going to tell you that they're closer to the organic end, and to be honest, many times sustainable and regenerative can sometimes surpass those organic standards. You know, for us as a farm, we focus on conservation in agriculture, as well as regenerative land stewardship. And everything is raised organically and soy-free. But those are not labels that we've paid to have on our product, right? We don't have to have it on certain products because we're so small. But the soy-free, for example, you have to pay and be tested and everything else, and we've not done that. But if I'm at a farmer's market and you ask me, those are things that I will tell you exactly how my animals are produced, how our vegetables are produced, et cetera, et cetera. So everything is about communication and simply asking, how do you produce this product? That's, I hope that answers the question.
That's great. Communicating with the farmers is key. And Matt, thank you again for another question. Are most farmers in your networks, by and large, ready to play a role in addressing climate change? Can they explicitly say climate change, or do you think it's unimportant?
I think it's super important. I think more and more farmers are beginning to understand that it's important. I think that when you say most farmers in your networks, I assume that you mean the small farm networks and organic and, you know, culturally significant seed networks. Those are all the networks that I, for example, am in. I'm not in any of the big ag networks. So I assume you mean some of the smaller networks. And yes, they are very much having that conversation. And a lot of that, again, is surrounded by biodiversity and bringing drought-resistant products to the market, which are also culturally significant. And so, yeah, I think that the smaller farmers are most definitely having that conversation, because truthfully, in many ways, we are even more impacted because we're at a smaller scale. And so it is not just that it needs to be done economically for us, it needs to be done. So it's twofold for us.
I would contribute, well, first, the farmers that are in my network I would consider nonprofit farms and young farmers, first generation farmers. I know, just as an employee of Rodale, there's lots of discussion on the ROC certification, the regenerative organic certification. So that's a step beyond organic. You already have to be you already have to have the USDA label. And then over a period of time, there's different levels. And so this goes beyond just growing techniques, and it values soil health first, that we kind of have that with the USDA label, and then animal welfare. So ensuring that, you know, the animals are integrated into the system, you know, have a wholesome life, and then farmer worker fairness. So ensuring that, you know, the staff of the farm have, you know, livable wages and things like that. So that's, I guess, my contribution to the question. Personally, I think it's important, but I think at this time, I do think that there's a lot of work to be done just on the organic side. I mean, you know, people already struggle with, you know, purchasing items at the higher dollar for organic. So to even take it a step further to the ROC certification, I feel like is just going to take time. Not that we have the time, but it would take time. And then I'm reading this question from Manish. Yes. I mean, as an organic farmer, we don't use chemical pesticides or chemical fertilizers, but I would like to be clear that I do use pesticides and I do use fertilizers. They're just from organic or naturally derived sources. Okay. Are there any other questions from the participants?
Can you explain more about the NJ Organic Ag Board, Tomia? Thank you, Sandy.
So the general idea, and I don't want to go too far and speak too far out of turn, because we have a policy person who's extraordinary. But my understanding is that the point of the board is to narrow down the loopholes that people are using to claim organic and kind of bastardize the word. So people are like I said, you have a number of conversations that occur around the fact that, oh, I don't trust organic, the organic label, or organic doesn't mean anything because XYZ. And so what we are trying to do is to close the loopholes so that people can really go back to trusting that organic label and trust that there are people in place who are ensuring that that label means what it was initially designed to mean, without loopholes, particularly for big ag. But smaller folks too, who are taking the organic standards away from what they should be. And so that advisory board is to try to ensure that those standards are met and or exceeded by everybody. But I mean, you can also reach out to Callie Alexander at NOFA. She's amazing, and she was a critical point in getting this through. And she and others worked a very long time. But I encourage you to reach out to her if you have any further questions about the board. She's fantastic.
How can we approach farmers outside your networks on climate change? Do's and don'ts? Let's assume we don't have a lot of time to figure this out. We certainly don't. Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult question. I always like to just add too, like when I was just starting out as a small farmer, growing organically but not certified, I was taking my goods to a market, and someone who went to like the Tri-County Co-op to get stuff that was kind of shipped in and resell it at the market, saw that how I was marketing my produce as grown organically was attracting a lot of people, maybe away from her stand. And so she started putting up big signs that she was organic. And that was very frustrating, of course, because that really brings it back to talking to your farmers. And it's always tough to talk to people that start conversations with where you're not going to agree, because I remember some very tough conversations with that other farmer. And yeah, definitely. I mean, just from that experience, not to take over this question, but from that experience, definitely like not coming at it from a really frustrated place. I did not get any progress with that other person. So yeah, finding some peace before starting that conversation is definitely important from my perspective.
I think that there are a number of ways to reach conventional farmers, right? Because that's outside. When I think outside of my networks, I think conventional and or big ag, right? Organic or not. And I think a part of that conversation is multifold. So one, I think part of it is incentives. People farm conventionally because it's cheaper. So for example, conventionally, a lot of people pay somewhere between 14 and 20 cents a pound for chicken feed who are growing conventionally. We have to pay $1 a pound for ours, right? So if you want people to switch from being conventional to engaging more on climate change or organic, a lot of times those incentives will help. And more, there are a lot of programs now that are actually giving incentives for farmers to make that change, right? That's kind of a policy level thing. And as individuals, we can encourage organizations and policymakers to create those policies and those incentives, which in many ways is some, a lot of the programming that's going on now with climate change, a lot of the grants and programming that has come out of those grants is incentives for those farmers to make that switch. Because to be honest, if they're organic, then they're making more money from that organic label. Or if they have climate change as a part of their backdrop, sometimes they can benefit from that. The difficulty is the transitioning from conventional to organic. First of all, it takes time for your soil and your land to recover. And then you're trying to grow in a particular way without having that label to boost your profits. So there is a big issue in the transition financially for farmers. So those incentives and those programs are important to kind of get them over the hump of making that change. I also think organizations like NOFA, continuing to, and UJAMA, continuing to push policymakers into making those decisions as best we can. And I think that at the end of the day, it comes down to the consumer. At the end of the day, the person who's putting the food on their plate and on the plates of the table of their family gets the last say. Because if you don't buy it, they can't sell it. So if you insist that whatever food you're buying engages in the climate change conversation, they have to do it. The difficulty is that it is a little bit of a it's a little bit of a difficulty for the consumer because big companies don't always make everything crystal clear about what they do and how they do it. But as a consumer, if you say, okay, I want organic or not, because not, as you know, not all organic farmers are engaging in the climate change conversation, especially necessarily the big ones. But if you insist as a consumer that this is what you want, it will eventually happen. But it has to be the consumer at the almighty dollar at the end of the day that says, I'm putting my money where my mouth is and where my philosophies are. That at the end of the day, I think that's probably the most important thing.
I would kind of add to what you touched on with incentive and like the hardest part for conventional farmers, that would also be outside of my network. But it's hard. It's hard. The transitional stage is hard. One resource could be through Rodale. They do have the organic consultancy service, and they help conventional farmers free of charge transition from conventional to organic. I know at least in Pennsylvania, it's a free service. I'm not sure about out of state, but in Pennsylvania, it's free of charge. And I'll put a link in the chat. But I mean, that's one incentive for conventional farmers. And I think the best way that we could approach conventional farmers just initially is just asking them, maybe not using the word climate change, maybe just using like struggles or weather events, but just asking them like, what challenges have you faced farming? Because I highly doubt that, conventional farmers are immune to the challenges that we're faced as well. And so just kind of relating on that and then, going from there and just sharing your challenges and offering some successful stories. Yeah, we don't have so much time to figure it out, but maybe that could help. I will put this link in the chat now. Is that anyone familiar with this consultancy service? Are you, Tomia?
What consultancy service is this? Oh, for Rodale?
It's yeah.
I am not.
No.
I was actually
Yeah.
just listening to you. I thought that was very cool. I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah. And all of the consultants are great resources. They're happy to help. So yeah,
And
that's
that's
in the chat.
fantastic because a lot of people charge. A lot of
Yes,
people charge for that service. So that's fantastic.
they have consultants for all scales too. I know they have an urban ag consultant, small homesteader consultant, all the way up to, large scale corn and soy. So
Oh, nice.
a wide range.
I think just to touch back on the question about approaching farmers outside of networks, I think also when you're at farmers markets, not farmers markets, but things like the conferences that go on, there are a number of conferences that go on all throughout the year. But showing up to those and having that conversation with speakers after they've been up, or with other organizers that you engage with, and say, hey, I'm interested in being a consumer of climate smart crops, right? Or climate smart farms. Can you point me in the right direction? And a lot of times they will absolutely do that. And even if they can't, they now know that there are consumers who want to purchase from climate smart farms. And that's really important.
That's great. I do also want to add, I think it was at the NOFA conference, Jeff Moyer from Rodale was talking about this topic, and he reminded everyone that, no one gets into farming with the goal of destroying the land and contributing to climate change. Somebody gets into farming because they want to feed their community in whatever way that is. So I think Aslynn's point on, just asking about challenges and relating to them in a certain way, rather than, pointing a finger that, what you're doing is contributing to climate change, is a huge point.
Yeah.
And Matt's come in hot with the great questions.
Yeah. Can I just touch on what you said, Tess?
Yeah.
Also being aware that actually you're really educating yourself on climate change. We've got so many sound bites, like you said, with people pointing fingers. And I think the challenge is that as soon as you do that, it's like we were taught as kids. As soon as you point one, there's four more pointed back at you. And the problem is that a lot of people get the sound bites behind climate change and farmers, but they don't actually see the big picture. So, I don't care if you're a vegetarian, if you're getting your fruits and vegetables from 4,000 miles away, you're a big part of the problem, right? And so it's really a real education that we have to educate ourselves, so that when we engage with farmers who are already aware of these broader pictures, we're not pointing fingers in the way that suggests we're unaware of what actually is going on. I think that's super important as well. Sorry, you were looking at Matt's question.
Yeah, so Matt's next question: do you see much potential for carbon sequestration in soil by farmers? A little, a lot, and should they get payments for doing this?
I'm going to say, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I guess as someone who looks at the symbiosis of a farm, I see a lot of potential in it. And truthfully, farmers benefit from it if they would just do it, carbon sequestration. So I think that I see there's a lot of potential in it. There still needs to be more education, although a lot of education is in process, and more people are looking to the benefits of rotational grazing and things like that. And also the method in which you run your animals, so running your cows and then 3 days later running your chickens to clean up behind, like all of these different ways of doing carbon sequestration, I think is super important for farmers. Should they get paid for this? I don't know that I see that as being necessary. I think it's a benefit to the farmer to do it. Maybe in terms of needing infrastructure for rotational grazing and things like that, but I don't know blanket payments for doing it. I'm not sure that's necessary.
I know that Rodale is doing a lot of research on this topic. Personally, I'm not well versed in it. I know on our farm, I mean, we're growing on 14 acres, diversified vegetables and perennial crops. And I struggled just to get the cover crops in on time year to year. So, you know, as a young farmer, like I'm still trying to get the basics down, you know? So, I don't know. I don't think, I would agree. I don't think that we would be getting payments because as the farmer, if we are doing this practice, we're getting paid to do this as the, you know, we're getting paid in a different way that's just not monetarily.
Maybe the payments are part of a like transition to organic or transition to rotational grazing type of incentive like you were talking about earlier, you know. I do know one of the farmers that's in one of our programs, our farmland access program, is trying to get funding for rotationally grazing these goats so that, you know, we can move them around the farm. And so, like you said, putting money towards like establishing that infrastructure would be really helpful, I think, for carbon sequestration to be successful for more farmers. But getting payments after the fact, and I think like what you both said, it's really long-term benefiting the farm. And I mean, the climate too, but it's tough to say. I mean, if airplane companies are getting carbon payments for funding bogs or something, maybe farmers should get payments also, but that's a whole different conversation.
Well, when you put it that way, I mean,
Right? All of a sudden it starts sounding a bit better. But
yeah.
But you know, I think there's better places to put those funds when it comes to the farmers. I'm not suggesting that, you know, if there are funds for farmers, absolutely, you know, find ways to engage with the farmers. But I don't think, I think there are better ways that we can spend those funds. I also think there are better ways to spend funds for airplanes too. So
I just in thinking back too, I do think that carbon sequestration is part of the regenerative organic label. So I'm gonna just put that in the chat too. So if anyone wants to look into that a little further, they can investigate how it just goes beyond the normal organic practices. Were my links not showing up, Tess?
It was just coming into the hosts and panelists. So
Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
everybody, you got it.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to share about the ag board too. Yeah, I mean, does anyone else have any further questions? I mean, I feel like we could take this conversation in so many different directions, and I'll probably use my last breath on earth talking about how we should support local farmers. But I'd love to, you know if anyone else has anything that they want to share, or questions or challenges that anyone else is dealing with. do we have demos in Warren County that show the public, farmers, and potential farmers organic techniques? I mean, specific to Warren County, not necessarily. I know Foodshed Alliance does a lot in, well, online and on our flagship farm in Sussex County. We do, you know, organic farming educational workshops. But I'm not familiar with Warren County specifically, but I know there's also like NOFA does a lot of tours and education all over the state.
Yeah. So I know, like you said, NOFA, Foodshed Alliance, North RC&D does educational work. I mean, I'll let our other speakers talk about Rodale, but I mean, because Rodale's awesome. You know, and then you have farmers like me who actually do classes on farm. So we do a homestead weekend where we learn different techniques and things like that on a small farm level. But I think that I can't say specific to Warren County. What I would say is to engage in organic based organizations in the state, because a lot of times, you know, they will have them in your area, or they will have them via Zoom, or they will have, many of them have tours where you can actually go to the farms and actually ask the questions. So I think that that's super important to be able to do. Zoom is great, but when it comes to learning techniques and things like that, there's nothing that you're not going to get anything better than hands-on. So I would look at your statewide organizations and find out what's on tap.
I'm assuming Warren County is in Jersey, New Jersey. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, we're a couple days late, but Rodale just had their organic field day, which is, if you've never been to that, that's so worth a field trip. A little bit overstimulating for me, because again, I want to be everywhere all at once, but yeah, it's really, really great. Just kind of tapping into all of those, like Tomia said, all those but be it larger organizations or smaller farms that are kind of doing their own initiatives, it's definitely worth a field trip to kind of go learn what people are doing. It's a lot of cool stuff out there.
I'm always a huge advocate of farmers just talking to any other farmer. I mean, you can get such tunnel vision on your farm where you're just like beating a broccoli plant with a brick and wondering why it's not growing. You know, like anything you can do to just get a different perspective is always helpful. So whether it be, you know, another person's farm, or going to something like field day or your extension agency, you know, will be helpful.
And Rutgers also, if you look on YouTube, Rutgers has a program for niche crops. They have videos. And so there are a lot of videos on there that will show you various crops and you know, talks about how they go about engaging with those crops and so on. So I think that's also another resource.
That's great. So a couple more questions regarding biodiversity. How common is it that farmers actually do pro-biodiversity projects? I'm going to go ahead and say very, but let you guys kind of get into more specifics on that if you like.
Yeah, I mean, just in our food crops, we have 30 different kinds of vegetables, like 70 different varieties. But then going beyond that, I mean, we have an array of pollinator plants and plants that attract beneficial insects. So it's very high on my list as a farmer to ensure that I have biodiversity kind of stacked. And I see the benefits of that in real time.
Yeah, I think more and more farmers are getting into biodiversity, as well as doing things that used to be considered indigenous or native techniques. More and more larger farms are adopting intercropping and companion planting and things like that, which really helps with the biodiversity. So I think yes, I think more and more farms it's becoming a lot more common, especially on the small farms that aren't using massive pieces of equipment.
Absolutely. I mean, just like I shouldn't say simple, but just like companion planting and all of that helps with like an integrated pest management is something that you see almost instantly with like, those parasitoid wasps that attack the hornworms. Those are so fascinating, honestly. But yeah, like stuff like, I think, I mean, of course, we're talking in our organic and small farming and kind of homesteading world, whereas, a corn farmer that's a different story. But in this world, I think it's the norm for most organic farmers to really be implementing those kinds of practices.
Yeah.
And then Manish, thank you for this question. Supporting local farmers, we at the Washington Borough have been struggling to get enough footfall at the weekly farmers market. What can be done to get people to buy from local farmers rather than making a run to the ShopRites of the world?
I was looking at this question, and it is a challenge. And what I would suggest is take to social media. As much as farmers we like our natural, and a lot of us don't really care to engage with social media. And if we have to, we hire somebody to do it, right? That is understandable, but whether we like it or not, it's the way of the world at the moment. And I think that a part of getting people out is making them aware that you're here and making them aware of why they should come out. A, we need to make it fun. B, we need to engage with them, whether that's YouTube shorts, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Facebook, whatever it is, creating a social media funnel gets people engaged. Attention spans are super short, so you can do YouTube videos, but the reality is YouTube shorts will do just fine. Just letting them know that you are there, and why they should be shopping local farms. That's a key, because if you're not getting footfall, it's probably a lack of understanding why it's important. So I think that would be my, and obviously just talking to folks, but when you talk to people at farmers markets, you're kind of speaking to the choir. So I would definitely, I have to admit, I've been in the grocery store and someone was looking for something and couldn't find it. And I was like, you should go and see Jess Nieder over at Chickadee Creek. She has all that stuff. And they're like, who? What? I've been here for years. I didn't know that place was there. And she's like, I'm heading over. I don't like the way these tomatoes look. They don't taste that great. And I said, well, you should, if you buy local, Chickadee Creek does organic, and the heirloom tomatoes are amazing. That's where I get my tomatoes. Been doing it for a while. And then, and just having those short conversations where you're not pushy, but just engaging with other people. I do it all the time. And I don't mention that I'm a farm, but I'm addressing the need that person has in that moment, and letting them know that, I've got a fellow farmer out there who's doing what it is, who has what you're looking for. So, that something as simple as that makes a difference, I think, because word gets around. It's all about, word of mouth at the end of the day is a massive advertisement.
I totally agree with you too. I mean, and just thinking about social media for farmers, you just using it as a tool to create your you know, create your story as a farmer. I mean, people are so likely to go to your stand. I mean, as you know, if this is the reason, but you know, sometimes it is. Sometimes simply having Instagram stories, creating a story of your farm, sharing that narrative, and getting people excited and getting people interested in your story is the determining factor of, you know, are they coming to the farmer's market or not? I have a farmer friend who's actually farming out in Oregon, and they're so present on social media that I want to go buy their produce, and you know they're all the way across the states, but they're so good at using it as a tool for their farm rather than just another chore, another farm chore, that it gets customers excited about the produce.
Absolutely. And I'm going to give a little plug here. A week ago, actually, we did a farmer education webinar about marketing and social media marketing, and kind of addressing some research that's been done about like promoting your farm on social media. So I'm dropping that link in there. It was recorded. So it's definitely some helpful tips in there about, you know, promoting your farm on social media. I will also say too, like capturing the customers that you do have coming to the market and focusing on the people that are already supporting you is huge. Like I was going through kind of a similar struggle, and I started collecting names and emails of the people who were coming to my stand that wanted to sign up for like other ways that they could find our produce or whatever. And just opening up a direct line of communication with the people that are already supporting you could be huge, rather than just kind of shouting into the void. Developing those really authentic relationships is really helpful as well. Of course, also looking for new people and new supporters is huge and helpful. And of course, we want to get that out to as many people as possible. But we all know that farming is really hard work. So kind of leaning into what's working is really helpful too.
Yeah, as Matt pointed out to Manish in the chat, yeah, speaking to other business owners who seem to have gotten it right, engage, and flat out ask them, say, hey, I'm a local farmer and I'm struggling to get people out, and you look like you're doing an amazing job at it. Can you tell me what you're doing? They're not your competition. They're going to talk to you. And to be honest, a lot of farmers will talk to you too, but you know, especially a business that is on a different wavelength, they will tell you. So absolutely engage. Do we have any other questions from our folks in the room?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for spending this time with us, everyone. And I definitely want to reiterate what we were talking about earlier with, like, you know, even if it's just a salad box on your windowsill, like Tomia said, like growing your own food, and of course supporting your local farmer, like it really does make a huge difference in your local community. And then you know, that ripples out, that really does affect the climate.
Thank you for joining us tonight, everyone.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a wonderful conversation, Tess. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Tess.
Yeah, of course. Thank you both for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us, and thank you to everyone who joined us and participated and shared. You know, there's a huge conversation around this topic, and I appreciate you both sharing your thoughts and everyone participating. So yeah, I can send out if it's okay with both of you, like contact information and the resources that we shared to everyone who participated tonight. And if anyone has any follow-up questions or wants to, engage further in this type of conversation, I know my communication is always open, and I'm sure you're welcome to reach out to Aslynn or Tomia as well. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.